Welcome to Crime Most French, a weekly podcast taking you through intriguing cases carried out on French soil. Researched and narrated by Cedric and rudely interrupted by me, Melanie. We're the true crime podcast All the Lions. Crack open le vin and let the mayhem commence.
The case this week is the Paul Grappe affair. Grappe as in grape, with two P's.
So is there going to be a lot of whining in it?
Yeah, aha.
Didum-tsh.
In the mid-1910s in France, Paul Grappe turns into a drag queen to save his life and to escape the First World War.
Oh, hang on a minute. He doesn't turn into a drag queen.
Well,
he starts dressing as a woman.
yeah,
Drag queens entertain people.
Yeah, that's true. Well, actually, he did entertain people as well. We'll see later. But
Okay.
I would qualify him as a drag queen.
Okay.
It will work for a while, and eventually it will cost him his life.
Mm.
So how did Paul become Suzanne? Paul Grappe was born on the 30th of August 1891 in Ransonnières. He's the son of Jules, 23-year-old cheesemonger, and his 18-year-old wife, Marie.
Okay.
Paul does his compulsory military service in 1912.
Presumably that was more than just a day watching some videos.
As it is now, yes.
Yeah.
At the time, it would have been 12 months or 14 months. It's actually 14, I think. Reduced from 2 years. A month before the end of his military service, war were declared.
Of course.
So he's mobilized into the 102nd Infantry Regiment.
So infantry on the ground.
Infantry, First World War.
Yeah.
Enough said.
Mm.
At first, it's unlucky. He's just in the 2 years that have been mobilized at the start of the war. It was 1912 and 1913.
So he was first to be yanked away.
Yeah. He was sent to the front straight away from
Yeah.
August 1914.
It's hard.
But it doesn't matter really, because even if I'd been a bit older or a bit younger, he would have been mobilized in the end anyway.
Oh, they had millions to kill, so yeah.
Yeah, they mobilized all the military service promotions from 1915, I think, or 1916 even, all the way back to 1908 or 1909. So,
Yeah.
so it would have gone anyway. So, but it was just unlucky to be at the start.
Yeah.
He's injured twice in 1914. After the second injury, his officers start having some doubts, and they report his wounds as thin wound, and a thin wound is a self-inflicted wound. So they suspect that he shot himself, essentially.
So these are more suspicious wounds, kind of like obviously not necessarily out on the field of battle, but rather in the trenches. It probably looks very suspicious.
Yes, yeah. Unlikely wounds. I think his first wound was he lost a bit of a finger, I think. So it wouldn't have been sore, but not really an important wound, and not one likely to get from fire from the other side.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you tend not to just stop short at shooting someone's hand.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he's tried by a military tribunal, but he's released.
Well, probably because they need the bodies in the trenches, isn't it?
Probably, yeah. He's transferred to hospital, but his wounds don't heal, and the hospital staff start to suspect that he's making it not heal on purpose.
Oh, he's picking his scabs.
He's picking his scab, yeah, essentially. But they say he doesn't want to go back to the front, which, as now that we know what happened during the First World War, who would have wanted to go back to the front?
Yeah, if you wanted to go back to the front, then you needed to go into an insane asylum.
Yeah, there's a reason why there were trials after the First World War of generals for having no regards for the life of soldiers.
No.
That they didn't. So yes, you wouldn't have wanted to go back to the front.
God, no.
In 1915, went out of hospital and ready to go back to the front because they've decided that he couldn't possibly stay in hospital. His captain tells him that he doesn't believe for a second that his wounds were actual wounds, and that if he flinches when it's time to go over and attack the German trenches, he'll shoot him.
So he has two choices: either die from a German gun or
die
from his immediate superior's gun.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, that's nice.
So at that point, he decides that he's not going to survive the war.
No.
So he turns deserter.
Okay.
His grade at the time was corporal. He's tried in absentia, by a military tribunal and sentenced to death because that was the penalty for desertion.
There must have been a huge number of deserters.
There were a few thousands, not a huge number, because they knew if they were caught at any point, they would be shot.
They would automatically lose their
Thousands have been shot because of that.
Catch-22, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I guess the plan was people would have the choice between maybe being shot by the Germans or surely being shot by their captain, so they would go back to the front and risk the Germans.
That's definitely Hobson's choice.
It's not a great choice, no. So at that point, he decides that the only way he's going to survive the war is to disappear. So he turns deserter and he disappears.
Mm.
It was fairly common at the time for deserters to totally disappear. So they would try to leave the country or anything like that.
Mm.
But Paul had a different idea. He decides that he's going to dress as a woman and live with his wife in the open in their flat in Paris.
So basically hiding in plain sight.
Hiding in plain sight, where nobody would come and see him because they would expect a man and that's a woman that lives with his wife, so no problem. She helps him because she doesn't want him to die, obviously. So she pierces his ears, she gives him earrings, she gives him her clothes, she helps him put on makeup and learn how to put on makeup. He lets his hair grow. He removes all the hair from his face using electrolysis, which was fascinating for newspapers at the time. They all mentioned, every single article I read, and I read probably about 50 articles, they all mentioned that he got rid of his mustache and beard using electrolysis. I don't know why, it was fascinating.
Well, that's pretty high tech for that time. I don't
know.
As somebody, as a lady of that stage in her life where she's got the odd whisker or two, I could be fascinated by it.
And he also changes his voice. So that's his transformation.
I have an image of, I don't know if you've ever seen Little Britain and David Williams, which he had a character who was, David Williams is a very tall man, and he's got this kind of like Victorian wig on. I seem to remember him having a moustache and him going around going, I'm a lady. I have something like that inside my head now. Of this guy, je suis une femme.
So as Susan Langard or Langdard or Langlois or whatever, because newspapers have been very, very sloppy in reporting that story, so they get names wrong. They get his actual name wrong. He's called Paul Grappe. Some called him Justin Grappe. It was a mess. But there's also the fact that he changed his name at some point. He used two names as a woman. Both Susan, but the surname changed. So it must have totally confused the newspapers and they just made up new names.
Yeah, I guess you would like to try and keep it as murky as possible.
Yeah, I guess. So as Susan, anyway, he lives with his wife and it doesn't really shock anyone after the war because lots of men didn't come back from the war. So it wasn't entirely surprising for 2 or 3 women to live together. Well,
yeah, it would be splitting bills and having companionship,
Yeah, so there's a little bit of talk in the neighborhood about these 2 women living together, but they don't make any wave or anything at first. So people think that, okay, well, they lost their husbands and they decided to put their resources together.
Yeah.
So, fine. His life as a woman lasted about 10 years.
That's a long time.
It is a long time. And when you see him, he's probably the most unconvincing woman ever.
So he is basically David Williams.
Yeah, minus the moustache, but pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
There's photos on our website.
So he wasn't making an ugly woman. He was just making the world's least convincing woman.
Oh, yeah. He was making the most manly woman. It's just he didn't look like a woman.
Yeah.
Some articles say that he kind of looked like a woman because he was a bit thin and a bit tall and a bit feminine. No. He was clearly a man.
Yeah.
Even trying to dress as a woman, he didn't look like a woman
This isn't a willowy woman who can suspiciously pick up watermelons with one hand.
Yeah.
He just looks like a dude.
Oh, he looks like a dude, yeah. But apparently it worked because for 10 years, nobody even had any doubt about him.
Mm.
Apparently everybody was fooled by him, even his mother-in-law. So he knew his mother-in-law and he met her, I think, 3 times over 10 years and she never recognized him.
Did he have any facial hair before?
He had a mustache and a beard at some point.
Okay. Because, when I see pictures of you, because you have a big beard, And when I see pictures of you as a child, it's almost unrecognisable because you don't have it looks strange.
I don't know how much of a beard he had. He had a moustache, no doubt, at the start of the war.
Because everybody had a moustache, right?
That was compulsory.
It was compulsory.
Yeah, pretty much. It was nearly compulsory like in India. In India, it actually was compulsory to have a moustache in the army. In France, it wasn't compulsory,
not so much.
But really everybody had one.
But it was a la mode. It was very fashionable.
And he had a little beard in some of the photos I've seen, but not a massive beard. I really seeing him with a beard and a moustache and him as a woman is clearly the same person.
Okay.
Anyway, it worked even for people who actually knew him from before the war.
Weird.
He explained that after he deserted, that's in newspapers, he lived for 2 years in the flat in Montparnasse and never went out at all for 2 years. He let his hair grow until it reached his knees. He learned to sew.
Yeah, no, the newspapers are talking complete and utter nonsense. As somebody who's had very long hair, you do not grow your hair that long in 2 years. That's nonsense. Even that would take you about at least 5 years to get your hair that long. So the newspapers are clearly exaggerating by that point. Very small point, but you know.
They probably are. The story was really badly reported by journalists.
I mean, you could quite easily, comfortably, from short hair, probably grow your hair to shoulder length, just below shoulder length, in a couple of years.
Okay. As a woman, he had hair above the shoulders, and it wasn't that long when he was.
So we're talking about the 20s anyway. Most women probably had
he
short
had
hair.
a haircut that was called garçon at the time. So, and his nickname as a woman was La Garçon as well, because he kind of looked like a dude.
Yeah,
because
dude
he
looks
clearly
like a
was.
dude. Yeah.
So he learns to sew, and he starts making his own clothes.
Okay.
He even worked as a seamstress in a couture house for a while, and nobody noticed that it wasn't a woman.
Yeah.
He also works as a picture framer.
Okay.
And then one day, he says that there was a bombardment in Paris, because Paris was bombarded by the Germans a few times during the war from a very long distance.
Yeah, from northern France to Paris.
Yeah, from
far.
the Grosse Bertha.
Yeah. Oh, yes, of course.
That's
Big
what
Bertha,
that cannon was designed to do, to
Mm.
bombard Paris for about 120 kilometers away.
Yeah.
During one of the bombardments, he was so scared that he spontaneously started to talk like a woman with a woman's voice. And he decided after that happened that he would continue and therefore go out of the flat as a woman. So that's how he started to go out of the flat.
Okay, he is totally, I'm a lady.
Yeah. But he turns into prostitution because the couple has very little money to live on. And that's at some point his best option, he decides.
How can that be his best option?
Well, I don't know.
Let's not probe too deeply into that, but there's something extra he has that he shouldn't have.
Yeah. Well, yes. And at the same time, nobody who had known him before the war would have ever predicted that he would do that. That first, that he would dress as a woman, and also that he would turn to prostitution. Because he was like properly raised as a Catholic and all that, and that doesn't come with it.
No.
He says that during that time, he'd go to bars and clubs and make friends between lots of air bunnies. He says that he even received marriage proposals from men who didn't know that she was a woman. So what he was doing was that he was making friends with men, and as soon as it was getting too serious, he would just disappear. He would break it off, and it would never get to a point where they could see that he's not a man. The only people who knew he was a man-woman, as he was called in the newspapers, were other transvestites or gay men in the woods around Paris, because that's where they met.
Okay.
These are the only people who actually saw that he wasn't a woman. But all the men he met in bars, he went as far as that point and then stopped.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like the end of Some Like It Hot, when Jack Lemmon comes clean to Osgood, the millionaire that he's been trying to continually try and get rid of him, and he reveals the fact that I'm a man, and he turns out and says nobody's perfect. he like this guy was a very unconvincing woman.
To be safer, because deserters were hunted during the war and after the war for about 10 years. They go to Spain for a little while, and Spain had just had a military coup at some point in 1922 or 1923, and that's when they decided to come back to France. It wasn't Franco yet.
Yeah.
But because Franco turned up in 34, if I remember my Spanish history, something like that. So about 10 years later.
The Spanish Civil War was
36, 37.
33 to 36, wasn't it?
I would have said 36, 37. But anyway, that's not Franco anyway. It's
it was 36 to 39.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a previous general. But they decided it became a bit unsafe in Spain, so they went back to Paris. And they live in the 20th district at that point, so they're not in Montmartre anymore.
Yeah, not right in the centre.
Louise continues to work, and she earns the money for the couple when they come back. And she even takes a lover at Susan's request, apparently. And that lover brings his own mistress. So then it's 4 people living in that flat in some awkward combination.
So you've got 3 ladies, one of which is between air quotes, and a guy. So 4 people.
Yeah.
A bit crowded.
And then I suspect the neighbours starting to ask questions at that point. After the left-wing parties win the election in the coalition in 1924, the Assembly in France votes on the 3rd of January 1925 amnesty for all the deserters from the war. That means that they no longer hunt the deserters, and the deserters can now come out again.
Yeah.
So that's what Paul does on exactly the first day. Like the first minute he can come out as Paul, he goes back to the military headquarters and say, okay, I'm here, I'm a deserter. I'm now free.
Yeah.
Remove me from the list of deserters. They do. And then he can live his life normally because he's free again.
Yeah.
The story, according to some newspapers, is that one morning he came down the stairs from his building and he shocked his concierge. All buildings have the concierge.
Yeah.
So
not fancy buildings, but just all buildings.
Yes. What do they call it in Mum? What is she?
Oh, like a maintenance manager, like a building manager.
Yeah, that's what a concierge is. Looks after the building, so fixes small things and looks after people and makes sure the doors close and all that. So that's what a concierge is. It's not concierge as you understand it in English.
In English, it's not a guy with shiny buttons with gloves opening the door. That's what a concierge is.
That's not that. That's not what a concierge is.
Yeah.
So he shocked his concierge in the building coming down as a man.
Yeah.
And the story is that the concierge would have gone round the block, running around claiming that Susan had gone crazy because she was thinking now she's a man, because she was so sure that Susan was a woman. Other stories says that he would have come down the stairs dressed as a man and shouting, I'm a man, I'm a man, I'm a man. So the 2 stories are in the newspapers.
Yeah.
So he goes back to his old job before the war. There's again a bit of confusion in the newspapers exactly what that was. Some people say he was a foreman and then started working as a foreman on building sites again. Some say he was an optician. I know he's been trained as an optician.
Right.
But I don't know if he ever worked as an optician because he did his military service like everybody else, probably at 18, and then went to the war straight away. So that means that he couldn't possibly have worked as an optician before 18. So who knows?
And also, optician or building foreman. Those are quite different jobs.
They are very different jobs, yes. So some newspapers even say that he went back to work into a toy factory. And I dug a little bit about that story, and it turns out it's his wife, Louise, that worked in the toy factory as he was living as a woman. So in the late 10s and early 20s, she was working.
So not only was it the wrong person, it was also at the wrong time.
Yeah. Newspapers are really bad in that story. They just wanted to talk about that story because it was the man-woman and everybody wants to talk about the man-woman.
Yeah.
But they were too lazy to really find out the information. So the newspaper that broke the story in 1925, after he was removed from the desertion list, it's called L'Intransigeant, has interviewed people living around him, and they all say, without exception, that none of them had any clue that Susan was in fact Paul. At that point, his story makes it to the national newspapers because it's a juicy story about a weird man dressing as a woman, and also he was a deserter. It's the 2 things that every single article mentions.
Okay. Not surprisingly, because, I mean, it is just so salacious. Yeah.
So he's interviewed by those national newspapers, and he kind of becomes a small celebrity, and that's where things start going downhill.
Yeah.
even at that point, when he's no longer required to live as a woman, he creates a few scandals as a woman. So one of the newspapers, for example, wanted some kind of interview and maybe photos where he used to work, but his boss, who was a woman, totally refused to have him around anymore. Not because he was a man-woman, but because he was a deserter, and her son had been gravely injured during the war, and she just doesn't want to have any deserter around her. But he kicks off a fuss, so he ends up at the police station. He's arrested.
I mean, the whole thing is just deeply sad.
Yeah. Also, an unfortunate consequence of being outed as the man-woman is that they're kicked out of their flat. Because their landlord doesn't want that kind of weird people around, even though he's been around for nearly 10 years. One of the newspapers, L'Humanité, which is a communist newspaper, still exists. It tries to defend him, but nobody really wants to know about it, so he's just kicked out. Nothing can be done about it.
I mean, I guess at most point, at that particular point, in Paris, there would have been so many people that would have been affected by the loss of loved ones.
Oh, yeah. So, millions of people died, so yeah.
The deserters weren't really... They might have been free, from death, but I don't think they would have been forgiven by the mass populace.
No. Some deserters were only pardoned, I think, in the 90s, Because the ones that were pardoned are the ones that were alive, but the ones that had been shot were not pardoned. And I think those were pardoned in the 90s.
Wow.
So anyway, another time is that he was arrested for exhibitionism in April, later in that year. Yes, it was the 20s. Even now, he probably would have created scandals and ended up in not really recommendable newspapers and all that. So it was probably worse at the time. So how to be accepted at the time. But the years living as a woman scarred Paul. Psychologically, he just can't go back to living as a man. He tries, but he just can't do it. And he turns alcoholic and violent, and he had never been that before the war. He still goes back to bars as a woman at night, and he tells his stories to strangers. He has a photo album that he shows to people with him dressed as a woman and whatever.
I feel bad for him, and I think what it reminds me of are these like Donnie Brasco situations of undercover cops having to kind of like adjust back to being cops after they've been, undercover for so many years. This is kind of almost like what this guy's going through, you know.
The same happened to soldiers in the Second World War. Like American soldiers coming back from the war really struggled to adjust to civilian life, and that's why you have the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels are American soldiers that just couldn't go back to civilian life, so they recreated the army.
Yeah.
And they just couldn't. It was too different at that point, and that's all it was. And it was probably the same for him. He had been a woman 24 hours a day for 10 years, and he just couldn't go back to being a man.
No.
At that point, he has many jobs but can't hold in a single one of them. At some point, he tried to work as a car manufacturer, for example, and he was so badly evaluated by his management that they paid him 2 weeks' wages to just go away and not come back.
Oh, God.
Because he was too bad at it. He also applied to be a member of the Vice Police, which is ironic, but he isn't hired because the police decide that his credentials are insignificant as an optician, I guess. This is when Louise falls pregnant with their son.
Okay.
And at that point, he stops working totally. He just doesn't try
down.
anymore. Yeah.
He must have had bad PTSD.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. So at that point, he lives as a woman again, goes out at night, and doesn't do anything during the day. 3 years later, on the 21st of July 1928, Paul comes home even more drunk than usual, at about 10:30 in the evening. He goes straight to the couple's bedroom and falls asleep on the bed with his clothes on. Paul's son, who's also called Paul, let's call him Paul Jr., who's 3 years old, is ill and has been for a little while and starts crying.
Oh, dear.
And Paul Sr. is awakened by the toddler's cries. He's furious at that point, still drunk. He rushes to his son's bedroom and starts to hit him.
Oh, God.
Louise intervenes. He threatens to kill her. She says that she will therefore leave and go and live with his mom, and he says he doesn't care. He will kill her mom anyway.
Oh, God.
At that point, Louise sees no option, so she grabs a gun and shoots Paul Sr. 3 times.
Oh, that escalated fast.
Yeah. Apparently, twice in the head, once in the heart. So he just doesn't make it. According to some newspapers, the gun was either in his pocket because he was always carrying a gun.
Mm.
Some say the gun was on the night table. Some say the gun was on the fireplace. She says it was on the fireplace during the trial.
Seems a bit of a strange place to be.
To keep a loaded gun? Yeah.
And keep a loaded gun above a fire?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was after the First World War, there were guns everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, yes, of course.
When my great-grandparents died in the early 90s, we found First World War guns in the house.
Good Lord.
And they weren't like handguns. Well, there was a few handguns, but also machine guns and some machine guns in the house that my great-grandfather had kept from the war.
Souvenirs.
Kind of souvenirs, yeah.
That's insane.
It is insane. So in 1920, they would have been everywhere.
Yeah, of course.
Because the gun was not with her, it looks like it wasn't premeditated.
Okay. It was purely just a kill or be killed.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's the story in the newspapers at that point.
Yeah.
Louise turns herself in at the police station straight away. She comes in and says, "I've killed my husband."
Okay.
The police goes to their flat and they find him not dead yet,
Okay.
but getting there. So he's rushed to the hospital and he dies. He dies when he arrives there.
But at least she doesn't try and do something with the body. She doesn't. She
No.
goes straight to the authorities.
Yes. Unlike some of the other cases we've covered,
Yeah.
there was no hiding of the body, cutting into pieces or whatever. No, she just went straight to the police station saying she shot him.
I mean, on paper, it does very much sound like oh crap, he's going to kill the baby. He's going to kill my mother. I'm going to have to do something about it, and then coming clean about it.
She's interrogated by an instructing judge on the 2nd of August,
Mm-hmm.
so about a week and a half later or so. She's sent to jail awaiting trial
Okay.
at that point, and her son, Paul, dies on the 12th of August while she's in jail.
So that's both Pauls gone then.
Both Pauls are gone, yeah.
Yeah.
She is freed on bail on the 25th of August, awaiting trial.
Okay.
Because they decide, she's not dangerous, so let her out. Of course, at that point, everybody knows Paul's story.
Yeah.
So as the trial starts, he makes it to the newspapers again. Some try to report it as just a domestic violence case, so they don't really make too much judgment about who he was. They still mention that he was the man-woman. Of course, every article mentions it, but some don't make more mentions of it than that.
Okay.
Some can't help themselves, and they try to go into the seedy details, and they embellish the story, and they attribute him a parachutist past, for example, when there's no indication that he did it more than once for fun.
Yeah.
They mention that he has unpublished memoirs that were published in the UK. There's no trace of that, but it's mentioned in several articles. They even say that he is a member of the Vice Police as an undercover agent. Again, as far as we know, the police didn't want to have anything to do with him.
Yeah.
So the reporting when the trial starts is not good.
The press never changes, does it?
Yeah. Clearly, a lot of newspapers have already chosen their side.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that many of the newspapers, when they talk about him, say that he acquired a penchant for laziness and bad temper when he was a woman. Like it's a woman thing, and somehow by dressing as a woman, he got infected by those things. And so many articles at the time of the trial mentioned that he acquired laziness when he was a woman. And I thought, okay.
As a lady, I'd be outraged at that, but I can't be bothered.
On the 20th of January 1929, the trial starts in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, the newspapers jump on the story because now something is happening in the story. Some newspapers mention that never before the atmosphere around the trial has been so in favor of the defendant.
Okay.
Essentially, half the newspapers have already said that she's not guilty of murder, and nothing has been done yet at the tribunal. It's just starting.
Yeah.
But because they hate the man-woman so much, they've already decided that it's him. Somehow he's done something, and she's innocent. So for most newspapers at that point, the story turns into woman kills husband
Okay.
because that's what she's tried on. That's the trial story.
Yeah.
But when you dig into the story, the details of the story is the man-woman. And again, the newspapers are rubbish at reporting. They get everything wrong. They get the story wrong. They get the timeline wrong. They get names wrong. It's just a mess at that point. It's just lazy journalism.
No, it's just clear they want to have a message. And
They want to talk about the
this
man-woman,
message.
yeah, but they just can't be bothered really
Mm.
getting the story right. During the trial, to keep things civilized in the courtroom, only professionals are allowed, so newspapers and lawyers, and that's about it. Nobody, the public is not allowed in.
Yeah, but I'd question calling lazy journalism,
Yeah, I know.
lazy journalist professionals.
Yeah. Her story is that, as I mentioned, he was abusive, starting to be dangerous, and she had no choice. She had to shoot him to protect herself and the kid.
Okay.
There's only, apparently, as far as I can tell, one person who doesn't buy it. It's the judge.
Okay, so he's suddenly the
The judge thinks that
voice
she
of reason.
planned it.
Yeah.
As she describes how Paul was drunk and screaming and attacking her, he mentions to her that none of the neighbors, not a single one of the neighbors, when they were interrogated, mentioned they heard anything coming from their flat on that night.
Ooh, fishy.
Which is fishy because in a flat in Paris, you hear everything.
Yes.
And none of them, not one, said there were noises coming from the flat apart from the shooting.
That does sound wrong.
Yeah. So when he says that, Louise just totally ignores him as if he hadn't said anything and continues talking.
The ostrich approach.
Yeah. The judge also wonders whether she really shot people in the head and in the heart in the heat of the moment, or if she shot him in his sleep on the bed.
Wow.
Again, Louise and her lawyer just ignore what the judge says.
So the fact he doesn't have defensive wounds, they're
Yes.
not bothered by that at all.
Yes.
Okay.
There's really only 3 wounds on him and the 3 bullet holes, and that's it. Nothing else. So the judge finds it a bit strange.
So unless she's a sniper, it's a bit, smells a bit.
Yeah. At some point, the judge also asks her if she couldn't have found a better solution than shooting at him. And her answer is, which one? Like, there was no other solution at all. It's just that was the one. So that surprised the judge a little bit.
Yeah.
Also, he asks her, well, couldn't you find a better long-term solution, like divorce, for example? And her answer to that is that he had threatened her family. That wasn't an option. So now you can start thinking, he had threatened his family before. Is it when she started thinking maybe she should kill him? And that one day the opportunity appeared? I think that's the judge, what the judge is wondering.
Yeah.
Describing the moment she shot Paul, Louise says that the room was dark and Paul was wearing a dark black velvet dress.
Nice.
And she shot for the white bits. So the head, essentially. That's how she describes shooting him.
Aim for the head. He's not a zombie.
Yeah. Her lawyer is pretty good. He manages to totally invert the roles. So Louise is convincingly presented as the victim in the story.
Yeah.
So she pleads self-defense. So the trial at that point turns into, did Paul do something to justify being shot? It was no longer at that point was Louise murdering her husband on purpose.
Yeah.
So at some point, the judge reminds Louise that in 1925 she took a lover, as we know.
Yeah.
According to some witnesses, at Susan's request, and the judge implies that she's not completely white in that story, and she could have left because she did leave him with that lover at some point.
Okay.
And she says that, yes, I left him because I was terrified of Paul/Susan. And her lawyer at that point intervenes and says that he has 500 or 600 letters sent to Paul by women, love letters from women.
Okay.
As if the fact that he received love letters had some kind of justified her going away with the lover as well. But that seems to be the way it's presented in the trial.
I'm presuming he didn't solicit these letters, for goodness sake. He was just being...
Probably not.
Because he was in the public eye.
I guess so, because he wasn't looking for women when he was dressed as a woman. He was
Exactly.
looking for men. So the fact that he was getting love letters from women...
That's not really his doing.
I wouldn't think so.
No.
But somehow it's presented as, you see all those letters, therefore she left. Essentially, that's how it's presented. Also, the judge mentions that Paul tried to commit suicide when she left.
Okay.
And her answer to that is that it's not her he couldn't live without, it's the food.
He didn't know how to fry his own steak.
Yes, she does say beef steaks. That's what he was missing. Then there's a long succession of witnesses for the defense, and they all essentially said that he was a failure, a gangster, a liar, and some said that when they learned that he had been shot, it was good riddance. It's good. It's dead. Good thing.
Wow.
Eventually, the judge accepts that narrative that the lawyer gives him, the self-defense, and she didn't have a choice, and she was a battered woman and all that. And the jury agrees, essentially, and she's acquitted.
Okay.
And that's the end of the trial.
So
So she managed to kill him and get away with it.
If you manage to paint a strong enough narrative.
Yeah.
Hmm.
She gets married again later, a few years later, to Jean-Marie Machin. And there's a joke among historians that is, after having married a drunk called Grappe, she married an unknown man called Machin. Machin being used as a thingamabob thingy, a word to use when you don't remember a name.
Like a widget placeholder.
So that was his surname, so that's the joke. She dies in 1981 at age 89.
Okay.
Long term, the story was pretty much completely forgotten. And it was found again by two journalists, Fabrice Virgile and Daniel Waldman, who were writing a book on domestic violence in the first part of the 20th century, and they stumbled across these articles in the newspapers. So they started digging the story, and they found it interesting. So they published a book in 2011 called La Garçonne et l'Assassin, which is the... Garçon is a weird name. It's Garçon means boy.
Boy, yeah.
But Garçon is the feminine version of boy, but it's not girl.
Okay.
It's impossible to translate.
Okay.
In newspapers, they use man, woman, and that's essentially what it means. And assassin is assassin. There's also a comic book created in 2013 called Mauvais Genre, which is a play on words as well. Genre meaning several things. Mauvais genre means bad reputation, bad attitude, but genre is also gender. So it's bad gender, but also bad attitude.
Yeah. Comic books here tend to be not just something for kids and filled with superheroes and spandex and all fighting good and bad. There can be quite sophisticated, grown-up, complex narratives that are dealt with. It's a serious business in France, comic books, with a big convention being near us once a year.
Yeah.
But regardless, that's an incredibly sad story. Should I be saying something glib like, the moral is clothes maketh the man, but sometimes not? Perhaps not in this sense. I think we could see that trial by media is certainly not a new thing. And in war, there are never any winners.